welcome to another HMG episode. It has been a while. The reality there is, well, version 3 has been coming in and we've all been a little bit, not distracted, but engaging with it and trying to understand what it looks like for us. We've got a few other guests on today, so we might actually just run through the names quickly. I'll go left to right on my screen. So we've got Bob Quinn.
Hi, how you going?
We have Richard Trier.
Hi all.
We have Jackson.
Hello, hello.
And then myself and Jacob, who you probably all know. You probably know these three gentlemen, to be brutally honest, for most of you in Perth. And we thought we'd talk a bit today about what the Perth scene is opening up like, and understanding that the meta is not defined and certainly any standards are not really set in stone here, but what our thoughts and impressions are of LinkTree moving forward, but also probably a little bit of a sneak peek for those on the call in relation to some of the musings, thoughts and commentary for our reps going to WTC, the World Team Championship for Bolt Action, which that is a very, having three going is a very exciting thing for WA, I think, particularly, but for these three on the call with me and Jacob. So I think that's the introduction or the overall feeling of V3 is kind of where I think sets the scene nicely for the rest of the conversation. And in particular, so if I look holistically at version 3 at the moment, what I've been able to, we've got the first couple of army books that have dropped. We've got some dice on the table and some games that have been played and things that are coming to the forefront. I actually feel the game's in a pretty good space. It's not a perfect space. I think there are still things that could be done to change or improve the system, but I would like games to run a bit smoother, to feel a bit more streamlined in interactions. And I was looking for a lot of the rules across units, for example, to be consolidated into more sensible profiles, but just a smaller data set of profiles to have to keep track of. And I feel like for V3 at the moment, it looks like we've got most of that. And so that I appreciate that the ends of the spectrum are still quite open when we get to competitive play, which I'm sure will be commented on. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to see more engagement with, especially things like narrative driven components. I think there's a lot of scope in the 3rd edition rulebook for supporting in one book instead of needing your theatre books plus your campaign books plus your extra bits. I think there's quite a bit in the main rulebook to support that aspect. But obviously, we don't just care about what Dan's thinking about. I want to know about what everyone else is thinking about too. So I might actually jump in there and we'll start with Bob. And what are some of the things that you think that you've noticed or the feeling for V3?
I think it's been pretty positive down at Albany. Obviously, I haven't been out to Perth yet for any particular thing. So at the moment, anyone who's actually played, I haven't heard anyone sort of opting out or not liking it or whatever. But it has been handy. We had a couple of guys. One of the guys has done a couple of slow grow leagues type thing. I think you guys in Perth did the first one simultaneous as with us, with your own one, which was good. Just getting people to get small groups. And then this latest one, we've had rounds focusing on not just playing, but also the hobby side. We've got a few new people coming in with the new version. Just happened to coincide. They discovered the game as it changed over, which was handy. Nothing worse than picking up a new game and then having to buy a new book 2 months later. But yeah, no, it's been very positive. The games we've played and the people we played, it's good. We'll go through what I think is good about it later, but the general vibe in Albany is handy because we've only got about 10 or so players, so to lose 1 or 2 is a massive hit. And at the moment, I think everyone seems pretty positive on it. We'll see how many people turn up to Southern Thrust. I think that'll really give us an idea of who's still in and who's dropped out.
What about yourself, Richard?
Yeah, I think overall I'm enjoying V3 probably more than V2 since it came out. I didn't ever play V1. I think where I'm really enjoying it is the shooting. It's much more streamlined. You're not sitting there doing a calculation. And what I'm finding, and building a little bit on what Bob said, we've got a few new players, and it's much easier to introduce them to it because you don't have to give them 30 different modifiers before they can roll the dice. So then you tend to, in V2, I tended to be the one with a new player doing the calculations all the time because it just took too long. Whereas what I'm finding with new players now, get them into the rhythm, and then they very quickly can start doing the modifiers themselves, and it helps them get into the game much more quickly. And then you go to the saves, and that's easier because it's 2 stages rather than 1. So I think that's one of the areas I've really enjoyed. I think the other one is, and this is also where I think a lot of people are making a few mistakes, they keep trying to calibrate against V2. V3 is a different game, and if you want to play V3, you must calibrate against V3. And we'll probably get into some of the details later about US, and everyone's unhappy that US can't move and shoot for free and all that. But it's a calibration thing. It's a calibration of US getting an extra shot in V3. The way V3 shooting works actually probably makes them pretty powerful. Time will tell, but we'll see where we get there. So that's probably my 2 big things. It's much more streamlined, to your point, Dan. And the second one is it's a lot easier to get new players into early on.
Yeah, I would agree with some of those, definitely. Jackson?
I probably have I don't know so much where Bob and Richard are coming from, but I had made grand plans last year before we had the announcement that V3 was going to be coming out, that this year was going to be my year to really push myself competitively and attend a couple of events. I mean, obviously WTC was one of those. We had CanCon at the start of the year. There's a few other bits and pieces that I'd made kind of a decision just before V3 announced that I was going to focus on prepping for those and use that as an excuse to do some travel. So what that's meant for me and my local group is that I've focused pretty much exclusively on the competitive side of things. And there's a lot I'd like to do with V3 outside of that. There's not a lot that I've touched on in terms of the super narrative stuff, but even just drafting scenarios, drafting forces to match super specific niche pieces of history. I'm just loving the capacity to engage with the history in a way that V2 and V1, because I play V1, really didn't allow you to do in quite the same way. I mean, theatre selectors let you have some of that. And in some regards, it's quite interesting. I actually feel that V3 is a much more positional game. There's not as much crunching of the numbers. And there's a lot more, and again, this possibly comes down to the Perth community and our exceedingly dense terrain, but there is a lot more positional nuance to V3, partially because just a lot of the modifiers have disappeared, and some of them are tied to movement. And so if you're getting shot and it's static, you want to be moving, so you're not getting caught in the open. And if you're wanting to actually deal damage, you need to be getting up and playing aggressive and using that space. So from my perspective on V3, it's been a massive improvement, both from the narrative side and then from the competitive side. The positional aspect, the simplicity of removing some of those modifiers, and the change to the cover save has definitely, I think, elevated the game in some regards.
There's some definite interesting points there to consider. Now, Jacob, I appreciate it's probably been a little bit maybe distracted recently.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like Dan and I are really heavily invested into V2, and we were championing it for a very long time that it wasn't a broken game, unlike everybody else out there on the internet. But the but V3 in particular, yeah, I've only played a couple of games and whatever else, but it was in one match I was able to learn the differences and the nuance to it. The main thing is positionally, movement, speed of play, and aggressiveness all like coincides into a more fun, quick game. Whereas typically turn 1 and 2 in V2 was, hitting on 7s and whatever else, you may as well not engage in any kind of shooting or anything like that. I think the modifiers in particular just makes danger present on the board at all times, and just getting up and close is just really exciting, engaging, fun. I mean, it's a completely different game, and I think that I had not the competency of someone like Jackson, but I did have a bit more of an understanding than the average player at V2 towards the end. And this, it feels like it's completely spun the other direction. So like myself, I'm just recalling back to games with Richard, even in a previous event from months ago. It felt like 4D chess at that point. It felt like Richard had really understood the new rule set well beyond what I have. Obviously, had like 5 or 10 games under his belt by that point, and I probably had 3, something like that. But same with Jackson and same with Jono. Like it just seemed like those that are playing the game consistently are playing it well and really have adapted and are not just treating it like V2 with different rules. They've really manipulated their lists and how they play the game, and that just excited me because it's like, this is really fresh.
I think that's a very fair reflection of what a lot of us have been going through in WA. Like I myself, and I've said and played games against Jackson, Richard, and obviously some others. And every time I come away going, I'm still trying to play my list like it's V2. Like I'm still trying to, like the speed at which I'm trying to engage with stuff. And like I love, for example, the changes to objectives typically being sticky in key positions. I think that's a massive improvement on the game and a mission that was a little bit predictable. Whereas you can't afford to just sit back in that mission anymore. It's like, that's going to lose. You are absolutely going to lose. I think it's going to a good space. And that really probably goes into one of the fundamental changes, or I should say there's several fundamental changes. Cover saves is obviously a big one. But there's a few other key rules that I've picked up in particular that I'm interested on people's thoughts and impressions of. So if we were all going to suggest, and I'll go last this time, but if we're all going to suggest one particular key rule change that we feel has aided that shift to go, this is no longer V2 bolt action, this is a new thing, this is a new beast of V3, and there's a big wide door that we can all run through and learn about and do things with. Have you found a rule that particularly, Bob, you've gone, oh, that's something that I want to potentially engage with more, or something that, oh, that's different, I have to watch out for that because that wasn't there before?
I think the change to being able to hit, so your hit modifiers, your small teams have really taken you've got to be a lot more careful with them. I think before you could stick a small team on an objective, or they could be somewhere, and you would just get, they'd tank a whole lot of shots, and you'd almost not bother shooting at them because you couldn't kill them. Whereas now, you'll shoot at a small team because you can hit them. Maybe they might have Infiltrator or something on those lines, and they may cover save, but you've got more of a chance of actually taking them out. I think that's a mind shift, especially for some lists that I would play. Your observers and that sort of stuff, you would be fine with them, and now I think that's a big shift personally. The small teams, everyone went, yay, we can get small teams for 25 points, but oh no, now they just evaporate if you put them in the wrong spot. So like Jackson was saying, positionally, if you put them in the wrong spot, they're just going to evaporate. And I think some people are really struggling with that thought in their list building. That's, I think, a big change.
It's 100% one of the issues I have at the moment, Bob.
Yeah. Don't worry, I've had the similar sorts of things, but I've made enough mistakes recently that I'm kind of getting forward with that.
What about yourself, Richard? I think Bob's points are very, very accurate.
They are, although my favorite small team is anti-tank rifle because he can sit back and give you a 48-inch range. I used him as a sniper yesterday and took a company commander out. It was brilliant. But anyway, that's off the record. But I would say the one that for me has made a major change, and you've got to be careful because every now and then when I'm playing, I actually forget about it, is the change in the rules around deployment zone edges. It's no longer table edge. It's now deployment zone edge. And it's effectively, if you're on long table edges, it's the back edge and the sides, the 12 inches in on each side. And if you're playing quarters, it's only the table edge of your quarter. In other words, you can't come in on your other part of your table edge unless you do outflank. So outflank suddenly becomes very interesting because, first of all, outflank can go right up the side of the table up to the enemy's deployment zone. And obviously, if you're playing quarters on the one side, there is no
Just all the
enemy
way.
deployment zone edge. But also it allows you to come on your own table edge, which is actually quite interesting for certain scenarios. So I would say that that's been a significant shift, and a lot of people haven't sort of picked up on it. And I still have this problem where I'm safe and I'm okay, and then this guy deploys 12 inches up the side, and I go, bugger, I forgot about that. So I would say that's one of my biggest changes.
Yeah, I have been caught on that a couple of times with like in my head going, oh, I think I understand deployment zone edges. Like I think I understand that. And then when actually playing it out, I went, I do not understand that. Jackson?
There's a couple of really obvious ones, but I actually want to go to one of the less obvious changes that I think is probably more impactful. And that is the massive shuffle up around anti-tank and heavy weapons. And that's specifically the functional rebalancing of how shape charge and standard pen weapons match against each other. Obviously, shape charges are now a fair bit more expensive to get a hold of, and obviously it's much easier to cram a lot more vehicles on the table. So anti-tank is a massive consideration. And if you're writing a list, you really need to be layering that into it in some way, shape, or form. But a Panzerfaust is now a much more expensive asset. They're still really good, but they're definitely something that I think is perhaps a little overpointed. And while it gives you extra flexibility, I mean, you've got to use them quite sparingly. However, the addition of +1 pen within 6, that is something that is absolutely massive. And especially in my recent prep games, the capacity to turn what's probably now, I would argue, functionally the best armored transport in the game in the form of either the M3 White Scout Car or the M3 Half-Track in the American list with the heavy machine gun, turning that into something like an armored car that you can actually just yeet around the table and pick up vehicles with left, right, and center, because if you get it in the rear, it's a +4 with 3 shots. Is a little bit ridiculous, but also absolutely beautiful. Same with suicide anti-tank rifles. Richard can attest to the fact that a meat chopper parked behind something will make a mess of it if it's within 6. 12 functionally +4 shots into the back of most vehicles will kill them, even if it's armor 9.
I mean, even to a degree, like superficial damage is obviously a thing now with its own table, but that double immobilized result, you're throwing enough dice at it that it's like you don't even have to kill it outright. You can actually attrition out the vehicle and cause damage.
Pin stack with it. Like, there's lots of options, and I think that is something that most people are really sleeping on, in the fact that, for example, heavy machine guns just went from good but expensive to the changes inherent in V3 being nuts at long range and absolutely insane within 6 inches.
Yeah.
Same goes for AT rifles, same goes for any of the other non-shape charged anti-tank that you can fit into a list. Of which there is a surprising amount when you start digging into it. And it's worth taking because, again, it's much easier to cram a lot of Armor 7 into a list.
Yeah. Well, what about you, Jacob?
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that there's probably less games under your belt, but what stood out?
That's fine, but the biggest thing that stood out with the book is the change of mission structure and how that you're rolling for different things. So, like, I don't know. Run me through this with the events that have been under your belt, guys. Like, is that still the norm? Are we still playing from the rule book as that you're rolling from a table for a mission, or is this predetermined for the event? Tell me what's happening with WTC.
It's very much not. That seems to be something that a lot of people are very resistant to. Mm-hmm. And part of it is that there is some combinations of those missions that just don't work well.
Yeah.
in saying that, the more important component behind the rolling for it is the aspect of not knowing what you're going into, knowing that there is potential you wind up with a fog of war style deployment, and having to actually build a balanced, functional, flexible list that can cover all potential bases. And that's, I think, probably the value in the rolling for random missions and random combinations of missions. And that seems to be, while people may or may not be applying that specific rolling for their missions into their events. CanCon didn't, WTC didn't.
Right.
Trying to keep a level of secrecy or a level of you need to prepare for everything is a very big part of V3 functioning well. And WTC in particular, I don't know what your guys' perspectives are, Bob and Richard, but there's a very, very, I would actually say it's probably the best and most elegant selection of missions and scenarios and potential circumstances you need to plan for that I've seen in a pack. It's just got a bit of everything, and every one of those missions needs to be played differently with different forces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just make
sorry.
So one comment on, I did run the Skulls tournament about 2 weekends ago, and it was a big part of my thinking. So what I did was I got the folk to design their lists first, and I just informed them the missions would come from the book. But then what I did in the missions, I pre-selected them. So once I had all the lists in, I released the missions, but they only got them after they had sent their lists in, and I did stick to the book. I just have a view on the book missions. A lot of people are complaining about some of them not workable. What I'm finding is you need to have a really good strategy around each concept. A lot of people Fog of War is the one that causes most of the consternation. To be honest, Fog of War, there's a strategy. You just got to know how to do it.
Yep.
So for me, if you haven't thought about the strategy and you just play it randomly and you're coming on all over the place, yes, it is a fun fight for everybody. But I've tended to win most of my games by having an actual defined strategy for Fog of War. Anyway, sorry, Bob, I cut you off. You were wanting to say.
No, I was going to say with the WTC, it's the first tournament I've been to in V3, and I think you're right. They've picked something of everything. I think they could have maybe mixed up a little more. Like both of the objective missions are both Fog of War, so they could have maybe mixed that up a smidge. They like the kill point mission. Obviously, that seems to be something that comes up a bit. But
Welcome to Europe.
and I personally like objectives because then you're not worrying about deaths and you're actually trying to do something. But as it is, I think it's got something for everybody. I don't think there's anyone going in going, oh, I love every mission. I think them having the fifth list to 4, so you can bring a list in for certain missions, is defeating the purpose a little bit, because there's clearly some teams who have got some a couple of lists that are just clearly the kill point lists. You know, they've got 6 dice and 2 Sturm Tigers. So, you know, they're clearly going for, you can't kill me, you didn't prepare for this, sucks to be you. So I think the selection of missions is great, and then they've kind of watered it down a smidge by letting you have a fifth list. But you know, I'm not organising in the tournament, so I'm never going to complain when someone else has put some effort in. I'm just going to come and do the best I can. So I think I do like the missions. I like the way you do it, and it does add that element of randomness. But I think with a tournament, you have to have them set, because if you've got everyone rolling, then you know, you might get someone who just rolls into missions the whole day that suits their list, and it's not fair. It's not a fair and equitable thing when you're having a tournament. You need everyone playing the same, so then you know who the winner is. I'm a big believer in that sort of stuff when it comes to an even playing field. I think everyone needs it, but I do like Richard's idea. Build your list, and then we'll put the missions out there. I think that's a good one as well. Sorry about my camera. I've just realised it's 11 degrees. It's starting to rain, so I might have to go find inside.
You're right. Just wanted to
So,
go on this point just a little bit further. Obviously, you guys have played a little bit more than me. I found that the whole rolling randomly on the chart to determine a mission keeps it really fresh. And that, for example, something like Fog of War, which isn't something you particularly, I don't know, innately plan for in your kind of V2 mindset of a regular list. It's quite different. So we talked about it. I think Bob was just bringing up, and the perspective I was hearing was like players rolling for the chart right there and then, and every other table getting essentially a different game. Then we've played events where we've had like the TO roll, and then that's what everybody's playing right there and then. And then Richard's essentially gone through and vetoed the good mission combinations and put them forward for skulls. What do we think is the right way to do this? And it sounds like internationally they're trying to skip this thing altogether, and maybe more aligned in the method that Richard's chosen for skulls.
I would say internationally there's a slight nuance. They are putting the missions out before people are designing the lists. But they are choosing missions that are not from the book, because of the 6 missions, 3 of them are not book missions.
Yeah.
Right.
So all the deployment and all the table type size is out of the book, but the actual objectives, the 3 of them are not. So when you get to that situation, I think it's probably best that you do announce the missions before the lists. What I did was I said book first, so that people didn't know there was going to be some random funny thing from outside. It was some combination of the book.
Right.
There were a couple of reasons. One is I have heard a lot of people complain about some, and there were a lot of new players, so I didn't want to give them very complex missions. And the other part of it, Fog of War is only a 1 in 6 chance anyway of rolling that. And I didn't want to randomly find out that we had 3 Fog of War missions or something like that.
Yeah.
So rather than have let's change it, let's roll again type situation, I thought, let everyone get the list in, let's get the missions done, and then we just move on from there.
Yeah. And
I think it really boils down to, and I think this is just the strength of Bolt Action as a community and Bolt Action in Perth, that it's another tool in the toolbox for the variety of different formats for specific events. So variety is the spice of life, the comp format, whatever you want to call it for that particular event, whether it be narrative, whether it be competitive, whether it be some combination of both, whether it be neither. It's another tool in the toolbox for how people can do missions at events. And it works great for casual pickup games, which again, I think we focus on the competitive side of things. It works amazingly for a casual pickup game because it's so much variety. And I can guarantee that if I play 2 games this week, 2 games next week, 2 games the week after, I'm going to have different missions. I couldn't do that in V2. But again, within the competitive or narrative or just event space, it's another tool in the toolbox for how you can do a format.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So anyone who's listened to the podcast and our event coverage before knows that we haven't shied away in Perth from being experimental and doing things maybe a little bit different to what others would have perceived as the right or the wrong way. I actually don't believe there is a right or a wrong way for me to roll my dice and kill my opponent's troops. But the reality is the rule book. If the purpose of the rule book was to facilitate streamlined play for Bolt Action and to make it very simple for people just to get rolling dice, I think the randomized tables very easily accomplish that with a high level of replayability. So if that was the primary purpose, which I'd argue it probably was, it's great. When we get to doing events and supporting events, I like to see some variety and not always have the same customized. Like if we forecast 2 years down the track, that random mission table will come into a space where we think we know how to handle most of those circumstances. So there does always need to be something that bucks the trend a little bit. But if you're going to do that, and my recommendation, as we have already said, is that if you're going to put in a custom mission, or adapt a mission from Bolt Action Alliance or any of these other places that put out their packs for people to use, or you want to grab it from something like Adepticon or LVO or something like that from previous years, those are the ones that your players are going to want to know about, so they're not hit with a gotcha, that they can practice it, that they can get some runs on the board. The worst thing to do is to throw missions on the table and your players go, not only is my list not ready for this, I don't even know what I'm meant to do in this mission. Which is, they're the sort of things that you'd like to avoid where you can.
Yeah, I think just on that, with the table, the way they've set it up is they've also built in some redundancy. So after 2 years, all they really need to do is add in a new deployment or a new how you come on the table, or they just add another into the dice, and you can roll something else on the table. So I think they've left themselves with more room to maneuver than they did last time. I think that's how it feels a bit of, right, well, we can, last time it was this mission with this deployment with this setup. Now they can add in they can have 6 options on the deployment if they wanted to. They've got 3 at the moment. And they could take some numbers away. So I think that's a good sign. There's some room to move and add and change as they go forwards.
No, I'd agree. And then I thought the next thing before we get into a bit of conversation around the WTC component of what we're going to look at is subtle things that I've noticed or commentary that we've noticed. Subtle things that have changed that have still had an impact in the game. So there's things that I'm thinking around infiltrators shifting to whole of table rather than table half. That's maybe less subtle. That the first time I ran into that, it was not subtle. But
that's as subtle as a brick to the face.
Yeah. But like tracked vehicles getting dual pivots. Reversing being allowed to pivot, providing it's not a failed order or foobar, is also interesting. I had some others. The airstrikes, the pin changes on airstrikes and who places that aircraft as opposed to what it was before. All very, very good. Are probably less, not as subtle as maybe what I thought. How it's a minimum range is another one that was a fairly impactful change. What about things like that? Have we got other? I know there's already pages and groups summarizing these sorts of things as well, but any particular standouts, Bob?
I put my sort of changes as the 12 inches up the side and I think outflanking, which I think people are sleeping on a little bit because it was a bit annoying before, but if you've got something that needs to come and do something in your 12 inches from the other table edge when you come in is pretty good. I think the soft skin rule is quite a bit of a subtle change in that once you roll your 6, it dies, whereas before you then had to roll on the table. So sometimes you'd have that Jeep that you'd pump 6s into and then you'd roll 1 straight afterwards and it would just continue on its merry way. So I think that's a bit of a change and has made those Armour 7 vehicles like the Finns, what are they, Comsolettes, whatever they're called, those things that look, the dude's got about 12 of them in a list at the Spanish guy, which I really don't want to
great.
out of all of them. So those become a lot more effective. So any army that doesn't have a transport that's not a soft skin option are a little bit hampered. I think that's a bit of a subtle change there. So that's my input for that one.
Richard?
I think there's a couple. The one is the change in ranges and things like the anti-tank rifle that went to 48 inches, units like that suddenly give them a reach that wasn't there before and makes them, for their points cost, a lot more attractive. The other one is the changes in the vehicle rules around pivoting twice when you do an advance and once when you run, whereas it used to be once and nothing. I also quite like that tracked vehicles don't get the double speed on the road. It sort of makes them be tanks, other than unless they've got fast on them. So I think those are some of the ones that have also quite fundamentally changed the game. You can whiz around and use your vehicles a lot more flexibly, but be careful because there's a lot of stuff that's got a much longer reach to come and get you. Yep,
I would agree that and it is actually good to see both sides of that equation get a little bit of a buff. Jackson?
My pick would be force construction. Obviously, some of us in WA have literally just got our hands in the last week on a copy of Armies of the USA in the last couple, in a couple of weeks before it officially releases at WTC this weekend. Now, there's a couple of layers to that. First up, I think what we're actually starting to really establish is that there is a place for every single platoon type in the game. And a lot of people were poo-pooing the recce platoon and the engineering platoon in particular. We're seeing those used. They're not as common as a lot of the other lists, other platoon types in lists, but they add something to the game and they add value, and especially in combination, they can make for some pretty gnarly problems to solve. The other thing is that now we've got 2 army books, Germany and Armies of the USA. There's some subtle changes around what different units can access what. For example, the armies of Germany, it went from being very easy to stack 2 light machine guns in multiple different types of regular troops or even inexperienced troops. There's only a couple of profiles that do that now without some other kind of special rule tax, for want of a better term. That's a subtle change that instantly changes how a more V2 style V3 rulebook German list plays versus an Armies of Germany V3 German list plays.
Yeah.
Things like the presence of Browning automatic rifles, BARs, in different squads in Armies of the USA. There's now some, and light machine guns. There's some now very, very thoughtful decisions you want to make about which units you're taking to get access to say more than one BAR or more than one LMG, or in the case of Armies of the USA or Armies of Germany. I mean, Armies of Germany had some really interesting stuff for allowing you to manipulate and add extra units instead of some of your compulsory units in the engineering platoon. Armies of the USA obviously has got a number of different sort of MSU infantry units that you can slot into or out of the heavy weapons and rifle platoons. So again, we're starting to see some very subtle changes that quite substantially and fundamentally change how you're seeing lists played. I mean, it's actually, unless you're willing to pay sort of 10 to 15 points per squad, the 5-man dual light machine gun squad in Armies of Germany is not nearly as defining as it used to be. Same as small squads with multiple bars, or even Marine squads with multiple bars in the Armies of USA.
And I think also great points, and there's a couple of other key things that are popping up as examples of where those different loadouts and those different restrictions, they actually change depending on what year you're building your list for. So that's something that I think is actually going to come to play. Like, we used to just build a generic platoon.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's going to move into you build for a period being early, mid, or late, and fundamentally that changes things. So Americans, for example, if you're building an early war list in that early period, you don't get bazookas. They don't exist for a selection. Find different anti-tank.
HMG Jeeps. HMG Jeeps everywhere.
Look, there's a few different options that might be available, but there's also the newer types of units that we haven't seen before, like the rear detachment squad, which, for anyone who hasn't seen the book yet, it's coming. They're inexperienced troops are cheap. These guys are cheaper. There's some drawbacks with that, but when you realize where Americans can put extra squads of infantry, really cheap infantry suddenly dropping down to defend heavy weapon teams and things like that. Very different game. Quite an interesting. I think we'll get a lot of people who are, I like this unit, I want to figure out how it works, and we're going to learn a lot from those processes, right, as they start coming around the traps. Anything there to add, Jacob?
I mean, yeah, I've got there's a core change to the whole game system that seemed subtle on the surface when V3 came out, and that's the inclusion that you have lots of support leaders all over the place when you have the various platoons and all that kind of stuff. And traditionally, with the high points costs that they were in V2, it was a high tax to pay if you wanted to actually have access to some, I don't know, Alpha Strike or 3 or 4 units moving around the board all at the same time and whatever else. But that fundamentally has changed V3, that all of a sudden that you have multiple weapon systems activating all over the place. And I think Snap 2 has become way more important than it used to be. As a result, that you've just got leaders all over the table.
I keep forgetting that all the time. I played a practice game the other day and was like, should have snapped 2 with that, and I could have come in and got them before they did their ambush and stuff. So yeah, so it's got a lot of extra bits that probably weren't used as much before. Rules that weren't used as often because they're a bit not as powerful. I think people are missing them a little bit. Me particularly.
Gun recrewing. Gun
Yeah,
recrewing is a
100%.
classic example.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, like simply the ability to be like, I know you just killed them, but it's still there, and like that. It was something that rarely happened in V2. Like the mechanics was there for it, but it was always had to have multiple artillery pieces anyway. You always had to have enough crew. It didn't often pay for itself. It's like, well, now you can literally, when you want one, you can pretty much just buy the second one and ante up. And I'm like, when the Japanese book lands, are they still going to have those extra crew members per gun that they can add on? Because I'm like, maybe the Japanese artillery just will never die.
Yeah, I learned that the hard way. I played a practice game home with John, and he had Japanese. He had these artillery, and it was a points game, and it was like, it's a 2-point swing. So a dice is off, and then they run back over to the thing, and then a dice is back in the bag, and all of a sudden you're not actually winning anymore. You're about to lose because suicide bombers are blowing things up, and you've put things in the wrong spot. So it's those sorts of lists I think have their place now. I wasn't really seeing a lot of swarmy Japanese type stuff with artillery, and I think that's the good thing about V3. It seems to be, everything seems to have a place if you can play it well. I think it does come down to a lot more to the actual player. There's no real sort of, I'm just going to bring this and it's just going to win, and I don't actually have to do very good, which is what I'm struggling at, because that's what I did in version 2. I found what was really good, and I didn't have to be a good player. So it's a good learning curve for everybody.
That's a lie. You're a pretty good player, mate.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're not bad, Bob.
You're not bad at all. You've made me think fairly hard a fair few times.
Yes, but I still haven't won. So until I beat you
Minor
at the
detail.
I'll then I'll say I'm an okay player once I've either beaten you or Richard.
That's
I've
all right,
drawn
Bob.
with Richard.
I
I haven't beaten him yet, and I haven't beaten you yet. So you're my white whale, basically. That's what it is. So yeah.
We'll just put a target on Jackson's forehead in the edit.
I know, it's fine. And for some reason, I always have to play him. It doesn't matter whether it's first round, third round. I'm having a good tournament. Oh, there's Jackson. Oh well, it looks like I'm coming mid-table again, so it's fine. So yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, man.
So, and I mean, the funny thing is, like, even with the 5 of us on the call, all having good contributing points, there's a bunch of stuff we haven't touched on as well. That really, there's a lot of optimism, I think, about V3 and where it's going to go and how it's going to develop, and that we do have, providing that we are willing to relearn and adjust on certain components. I think it's going to be a great addition. Genuinely think it's going to be a great addition. But this is the part of the conversation where we start to shift our focus a little bit and start talking about WTC. So I'm not sure, Richard, Jackson, Bob, I'm not sure whether you've got some ideas or commentary you want to start with. And I'll probably take a bit of a back seat while we work some stuff through. Did we have any particular questions lined up, Jacob?
Yeah, I mean, let's start with probably the biggest difference between us and everywhere else, and that's going to be terrain. And this is just anecdotally what I see image-wise from every other event out there, that there's just so much open space, and that's just not how we play. So has that factored into your planning? Have you started playing on, I guess, non-Perth tables in prep?
So maybe I'll kick off a little bit of yes and no, because I don't know how much is how much, but like I played a game last night. I made what I noticed, they've just published a terrain FAQ page. So I looked at some of the pictures. So the forests are quite small, the walls are quite low. They've defined fields. Their buildings are quite big though, so it's interesting. So I think what you're going to find, and I have seen it in some of the pictures, you get big areas of blocked line of sight because there's a big building in the way. But then once you're around the building, it's sort of relatively open. I have heard anecdotally, because I know, for example, Bo has been pushing quite strongly for more terrain. He's quite vocal in saying V3 needs more terrain. And I've heard, and as I say, anecdotally, that there will be more terrain than previous WTC events. But in terms of my own prep, to your question, yes, I have tried to play on tables that have more exposure than I'm used to. Whether I've got that balance right, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one to pick. I mean, Bob, you go first.
Sorry, I was just going to say, all my my practice games at home, I've got a bit of an advice from the group about how light to put on the table. So I've been playing some very open games. But my couple of practice games here, I found a local wargaming club, and the couple of tables that were set up for me were quite. They felt dense. They didn't feel quite open, but they're not competitive players. They're just guys who like to play. So if you've got nice terrain, you want to throw it on the board. So but I have been practicing on a lot less dense than what we normally play at home.
Yeah, so it's one of those things so for example, if you take Western Australia versus the rest of Australia, if you go over to CanCon, you'll play on their tables and they might have the same or nearly the same amount of terrain as we would put on a table. The difference is that they have dense terrain. It's generally not going to go in the center of the table, whereas we have dense terrain and large line of sight blockers, tends to go into the center of the tables for us. When you then transfer that over to Europe, every photo I've seen from England, because obviously I'm in the English bolt action pages, etc., not so much the ones that don't speak English. Their tables have, as Richard was saying, lots of large line of sight blocking pieces of terrain. And then there's not a lot of the scatter, the lighter bits and pieces that would provide incidental cover. I have probably not done, like, my list build is very much more of a it works beautifully on a WA table. It's my army is more all about finding a staging point and then counter-attacking, or setting up a series of attacks out of or from behind a piece of terrain. Obviously, I know this episode's going out after WTC, which means that I'm happy to talk about this kind of stuff.
We're not going to sink straight away.
Yeah. So I've very much been with Richard. I mean, Richard and I have played a fair few prep games on more open tables with larger avenues, and then played on some of our tables, and just trying to, because the reality is you really don't know what it's going to be. We're not, and for all we can mock 40k, we're not 40k with a very preset, clearly defined set of terrain that provides a set of expectations for when you're traveling internationally. It may look like crap, but sorry, 40k players, but when you go to play a game somewhere else, you know what to expect.
Yeah, that's very true.
When you go to play somewhere else with bolt action, it's anyone's guess.
Fair point.
I think that's
so we've tried. I think is probably the best answer to that.
Yeah.
It'll all depend on how they rule what we play as well. There's been a little bit of discussion about, what is actually dense, what is not dense. To be fair, I've kind of stayed out of those because I figure I'll turn up, my captain will tell you what I'm doing, and then I'll just do the best I can. So,
Yeah, it is interesting, and it's something which a lot of our event placement, for example, we do strive to cross that boundary between aesthetic and functional, whilst giving players a good game. And we have typically had denser tables than maybe what you would see in other different places. That doesn't mean that it's a right and wrong situation. It just means it's different, right? But because it's different, you probably have to play slightly differently in those different sets, and the army lists work probably slightly differently across that spectrum. So you've all taken tigers, clearly, and you.
No, I'll have you know, I've taken 3 Yag Panthers.
Yes, I'm happy to go through the list building because I think I had a different view to everybody else, and I kind of everyone sort of talked me around to some more sensible thinking. And they changed the list building rules. To start with, you could do anything, and then they went to a 2 max 2 of any unit, except for some things, because I've looked through some of the units and they've got 3 of different stuff. So I don't really know, but so you couldn't take 3 of a certain type of tank or whatever. So I think, well, as a group, we sort of settled on no less than about 15 dice was kind of where everyone talked about. Sort of 15, 16 seemed to be the thing. And then, but looking at some of the other countries around the place, there's a few that look like England looks like seem to have settled on a 13 to 15 kind of area. They've got a few larger ones. The Spain list, so I'll let you know, I'm in Australia too, so I'm not playing with Jackson and Richard. They're Australia one. We've got the famous name Australia two, but we don't have we're not as much pressure. We're the second team, so that's good. I'm happy with that. But we've got Spain one first round, and they're the reigning champs, and everyone's talking about them now. Luckily, I don't follow enough to know names, but people keep throwing out these names like they're household people. So I'm feeling a little bit a bit overwhelmed. I looked at their list, and there's pretty much everyone. I can see how I will lose. So as long as I don't get anything about the Hungarians, I think I'm okay, because I really don't like the idea of not having options, and that's across the board. I'm sort of, a lot of my plans involve outflanking and that kind of stuff, and because you can't do it against the Hungarians, that sort of really struggles. Like most of my list building, I went through a few things, and Richard pointed out that I do like 5-man squads with SMGs jumping out of Bren carriers, which I've been playing pretty much all of version 2, and I forgot that I like that because they didn't have the Gurkha 3 points cheaper than they were before, or something ridiculous. And I went, oh, actually, no, thanks, Richard. I really do like that. So they've ended up making it. We've got a couple of howitzer Tetrarchs, which are a bit more sort of anti-personnel mobile artillery, because I don't really have artillery pieces in my collection because I didn't play them, and I don't like stuff that can't move. I find that I just get too nervous that I'll put them in the wrong spot. And like a lot of my lists, I've just built in redundancy. So I've got some vet lists. I've got things that can take a little bit of a punch when I put them in the wrong spot, because invariably that's what's going to happen. I think I'm still learning, like Jackson said, it's a positional game, and if you don't position right, then things can get shot at. So I need stuff that will last. So my hope is I just do what my team needs me. So if I keep getting I could go 0-6, and as long as that's what the team needs me to do, then I'm happy to do that. A team's game is a lot different to a solo competition. You're sitting there, your captain is going to choose who you play against, and hopefully we'll go, right, we want you to draw this, or look, if you lose this, that's okay, because we've managed to get 3 other matchups that really work. I think it'll be a sad time when we get that one particular round where he just goes, we've got bad matchups across the board, just do the best you can. So basically, that's my aim. Like every tournament, I'd love to go 3-3 would be fantastic against some of these people who everyone knows who they are. That's going to be my aim, is to pretend I have no idea who anybody is. Even if I have heard their name, I'll be like, oh, and have you played long? Yes. Do you do anything outside? Like, really ham it up that because that really puts people off. I've got some really badly painted tanks my wife and kids did that I'm going to make them choose which tanks come on the board, to get them thinking about something else besides the game when we start. I do have my painted and pink Nike headband ready to go that I will wear upside down and the swoosh slightly off to the center, because that always hurts people with mild OCD. Just all the little things. I'm going to wear thongs and play in bare feet as much as possible, because that really puts people off, especially Americans. They don't like bare feet. So just I like to play a little bit of psyops whenever I play, and just play the goofy, friendly Australian who will then try and stab you in the neck as much as possible. And if I can win the friendliest player whilst doing all these things, then that's that you've all played me. That's kind of how I play. How I take this game. It's Plastic Soldiers. I get to relive my childhood dreams. When you had your little packet of green men, and I didn't know these games existed. Until 10 odd years ago. So I just lean into the fact that we are just, it's a pleasure to come to another country. Like I said, I found a game shop and a war gaming club. They have like 30 to 60 people a night on a Wednesday night, and I rocked up there, and there was a guy I've never met before. I played him in something, and we both had a common interest, and we're on opposite sides of the world. So I think that's what I'm taking into this. The fact that it's an hour and a half drive from my wife's dad's place, and we've turned this into a family trip is a bonus, because then it doesn't count as me going away, and I haven't spent a whole lot of brownie points. But yeah, as far as WTC, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the experience and hopefully bring some stuff back. So when I do come and play in Perth, I've done. So working with Jackson, I've prepped a lot harder than I ever have before. I don't think my list is a meta list or super cheesy, but I think it's a solid list that can operate in just about all the situations that we'll come up against.
Yeah, and
Sorry,
you're playing Britain, aren't you, Bob?
Yeah. So yeah, it's a bit of a vanilla list. I think it's a fun list to play against. The guys I played at home, both Johns. John comes on and plays in Perth a little bit with you guys, and he goes, "Oh look, it's not a difficult list to play. It's a fun list to play. It's got some bits and pieces you have to think about, but it's not. I haven't sat there and I'm not min-maxing. I've brought stuff that I own." And I've bought stuff that I enjoy to play, and I think will do well in certain situations. So Jackson did grill me. He said, "Well, he went through the whole, well, what are you going to do with all these pieces?" And I hadn't even thought about ever doing that. And I seemed to have an answer, and he seemed to go, "Oh, that seems about right." And I've got a plan for each one, which I've never done before. So I've done a lot more work than I ever have for any tournament ever. So, and it's also fulfilling a childhood dream of representing Australia. People at work have actually, "Oh, you're doing that," and you explain what it is, and they still don't understand. But I'm a phys ed teacher, so everyone in my office is mildly impressed that I'm actually representing Australia. And then once someone said, "Well, we can't pay out on you because we've never done that," so that's part of it as well. So yeah, that's it's ticking a lot of boxes. International competition and those sorts of things as well.
Yeah,
That's good, and it is really so WTC in a bolt action format. I think has only been around for I want to say 5 years, might be slightly longer. Yeah. But it is really the penultimate form of team competitive play in all the different wargaming spaces is some form of team championship. And for those that aren't aware of what the format is, you're obviously playing on a team, and the lists you're only allowed. There are certain restrictions about what you can and can't have. It's one nation per team, so you can only have one British list, one German list, one. I appreciate there's some subtleties in some of the minor nations and stuff, but and then there's a matchup process, and then they fight. And as they were alluding to, your individual score is not necessarily always going to be wipe the floor with this guy. Sometimes it might be there's a bus coming and you're going to get under it. But it is certainly something that it is a big achievement to be on that team going out for Australia. And we're sending 2 teams, aren't we? We've got the Team 1 and the T2, which is pretty big for Australia to have two teams going in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's probably also worth noting that bolt action being such a small game, there's no magic about how we all got selected. We were just the dumb idiots who said, "That sounds like fun," and stuck our hands up first. We had 11 people interested initially. It's teams of 4. We wound up with 8 people able to attend. And it was people who, there was a couple of young guys like me. So Gabe, the team captain for Team 2, and I are both fairly young and just wanted to do some travelling. Obviously, Mike, our British player on the Team 1, and Bob obviously both have family over there, so they're using it as an excuse to go to a family holiday. And then the rest of the guys are just, some of them are on a holiday already and going to be there. It's just who's free, who's interested. Let's go give it our best shot.
How did the 11 form together? Like, where did you guys meet? Was this some people who you saw at CanCon? How did this all come together?
So initially, it was 3 guys. So Drew Baxter, Jason Drain, and Aaron Russell. So not this last CanCon, CanCon of 2024. They were all chatting, and they said, "Wouldn't it be cool if we did this?" I think they had a variety of reasons of why they all went, "Well, actually, we have the capacity to do this." So they talked about World Open War. They talked about WTC. They put some feelers out to people and said, "Hey, would anyone be intrigued? We're looking at doing this." Then I think V3 got announced, they didn't end up doing World Open War. I think it was the first event after V2 was finished. So first event of V3 drop. And then it also had a whole stack of different house rules, and it was kind of a weird concoction of a variety of different things. And they went, well, we'd like to see how V3 pans out first before we commit. And so then they put the feelers out. So Aaron reached out to me and said, would you be keen? Do you know of anyone in WA who's interested? They put the feelers out on the East Coast. We put some posts up on the Bolt Action Australia and New Zealand page and said, who's interested? Of those original 3, I think Jason wound up deciding in January that there was just no way he could make it with, again, life happens. Chris from Canberra said the same, who was another player. And then we had a Kenny over in France, who's an Australian expat. He also said he couldn't. We've got a broad spread. So there's obviously us 3 from WA, split across A and B. There's Aaron Russell, the infamous Aaron Russell, amazing bloke. He's team captain for Team A. So he's from Queensland. Mike's also from Queensland. And then we have Drew from Victoria, Mark Muskell from the ACT, and Gabe from New South Wales. Yeah, and we've been very lucky in that each of us, we can't do prep in the same way that some of the teams over in Europe can. We're all scattered across an entire continent, and all of us have been really supported by our local communities, local gaming groups. It's to prep basically, and to try and develop some expectations. And we've even had some guys feeding us information a little bit on the side about what they've heard and who said what, and what's been being said at tournaments in Europe and that kind of thing. It's also worth mentioning, like, we ran Drew Baxter ran a raffle at CanCon this year, a Pile of Shame raffle, and that was put out to the community to fundraise for us. So that raised enough to cover everyone's uniforms. So thank you very much, everyone who supported that. If you're a listener and you also were at CanCon and were lucky enough to put in for the absolutely ginormous pile of stuff. Yeah, thank you for that. But yeah, it's been a kind of a community effort, and we're just kind of, along for the ride. Some of us have got grand aspirations of doing well. The fact that, as far as we can tell, England won, which is one of the better teams in Europe. That's Australia 1's first match. And then obviously, as Bob mentioned, the infamous Spaniards are going into Australia 2 round 1. And we're all playing Demolition. And obviously, Demolition is always draw city, quite a tight scenario. So there's lots of things. There's been lots of overthinking, lots of conversations, lots of strategizing. There's 100 army lists, as I think you mentioned earlier. Each team puts in 5 lists. And will play any 4 given lists on any particular round. They can choose which ones before the draft begins. So there's some funky shenanigans, as Bob said, where we've got people putting in 5th lists for very specific tasks and jobs. Obviously, the really overt, obvious one is the dual Sturm Tiger and the dual Pershing lists that are very clearly 5 dice and very clearly designed for the kill points missions of, even if you kill nearly everything on the table, you still won't score enough points to win. If we just kill a unit a turn.
Just to build on that, you can if you table them, because if you table, you always win. You take all the victories, so you have to table them.
Absolutely, but with everyone pooling for life vehicles, good luck getting through 2 Pershings.
That's what I got a Panzer Busher for. But anyway, I just want to build on something else Jackson said, and what you also said, Dan. The comparison of how, what are we seeing in comparison to the Europe and what's coming. And I think that's something quite important. I think what's quite one thing up our sleeve is they don't know us. Because what I've noticed with a lot of their lists, that a lot of them are conforming. Like if you look at the England 1 list, there's 1 US list, but the other 4 all have a captain. They all have 4 or 5 bits of armor. They all have some crappy infantry. Like one of the German list has got 2 squads of veteran Fallschirmjäger, but most of them have like 3 infantry units. Most of them are going into trucks. Most of the trucks are inexperienced. So effectively, they've sort of got a copy-paste type mindset.
Yeah.
And then all their lists are sort of conforming to that and all their officers are inexperienced, which is interesting as well. Whereas I've sort of worked on the officer, especially with the Armies of Germany book. If you take the officer as a unit of 5 men, you actually pay 90 points if you take them regular with SMGs. That's the same points as a squad. But if you take 2 rifle platoons with 2 officer squads like that, you've actually got 6 squads for the same price that you would have paid for the squads, excluding the officers. And that's one of the things in my list is there's no spare dice. There's no dice. I'm going to put a dice in as a filler because I want an extra order dice. Every dice has a job. Every dice has points spent to do a job. So anyway, I just wanted to build on what Jackson was saying. It's the 2 things. One was around the list, but the main one was, I think the big difference is they don't know us. So even for Bob, when he's facing the Spanish are probably in a rhythm of how they beat the Brits and everyone else. Yeah. They've not met the Aussies in their bare feet and their upside down headbands. So this is going to be cool.
And I should probably say as well, like one of the exciting components of this this journey that you're all embarking on is meeting those people and establishing some other friendships, because that's what will come out of it. We might all be salty for a little while, but reality is we all get friends afterwards. And that's something which getting especially because we've managed to get 2 teams spread across our nation, that's no mean feat. To get that all together, it's like you're going to get a good spectrum of like, wow, these are how the Australians play. Hey, did you know that the Australian team 1 plays completely differently to the Australian team 2, but they're both good? It'll be that sort of pin drop. It's like they play completely differently to us, but actually they're all able to hold their own. Not wanting to count your chickens before they're hatched, obviously, but
settle down.
It's a different.
The interesting thing there is that the best parallel we have to that is the US teams. There's 4 US teams going. They have it's interesting in that Australia has some similar components to US wargaming in the sense that they have a lot of people. The US have a lot of people, rather than us who are quite sparsely populated, but scattered across a broad difference, and they have lots of regional sub-metas and sub-communities. The interesting thing there is that if you actually look at a lot of the US lists, they're very similar. Like across the US, they're very similar. Whereas like you look at Australia 1 and 2, the 2 British lists they may be using some of the tools, but they're quite different. The 2 German lists are entirely different. There's only 1 Soviet list going. The 2 American lists are quite different. There's just a lot more variety, I would say, in terms of where Australia is at, and part of that is that we don't have a stack of big competitive events to drag everyone together and start to get a little bit of that, well, as Richard's called it, groupthink. And again, not saying that that's the wrong play for those guys to be making. Maybe their groupthink, which is what we're nicknaming it now, is actually 100% the right way to play, and we're going to get over there. And because we haven't conformed to that, we're going to get the absolute snot kicked out of us. But we won't know that till we're there. But yeah, it is quite interesting when you start looking at that, going, there's lots of similarities here. There's lots of similarities there. Things like, for example, the really big one that's jumping out to me is you look at the Italian lists that are going, and there's lots of cool stuff you can do with Italians. Italians are in a really good place in V3 at the moment, and they have some quite unusual ways to build a list. They're all the Italian lists that are attending are quite similar. Like really similar. It's not like it's a Britain where there's for example, dual RD observers are really powerful, and taking a multiple Humbers Mark IIs is really powerful. Like there's a lot of the armored vehicle slot for Italy in particular is quite broad, and we're still only seeing about 3 different types of vehicles in a lot of the lists. So there's a definite element of communities honing in on what they think is good, despite the fact that there's broad variety in things. I mean, the Finnish lists is another really egregious example. because again, there's some different tools you can take in there to make your list quite different, and yet a lot of them are quite similar.
Yeah,
I think that builds on the group think, because what I've been noticing in some of the European video reports and that is there was a stage where it said gun lines win. So then you start to see everyone moving to gun lines. Now I've started hearing gun lines are not working anymore because you're not able to be mobile, so you need tanks. So and I think they're going through that we need tanks mindset at the moment. So, but it's not so much tanks in the infantry. It's actually bringing a lot of light tanks, a couple of medium tanks, and to what Jackson was saying, like the Fin lists. Bob said 12 somolets. I think it's 6, but it's still a lot.
There is a list with 12. There's a 34 dice list with like 12 comsomolets.
Yeah.
Yeah. 34.
Yeah.
So it's it's going to be interesting.
What pushed you over the edge to join this, Richard? This kind of seems like the next step for Jackson. We all thought that he was going to do this eventually. But yeah, what's your story about coming to WTC?
Well, that's a good question. Part of it was I've been wargaming for, I hate to say it, but over 40 years now. I got introduced to toy soldiers when I was in the military back in 1984 by Dave Davidson, who still plays with me here or plays with us here in Perth. And then I actually attended the Worlds for DBM, the 15mm Ancients. I attended Worlds in very late 90s. Big mistake. It was one of my first tournaments, and I got absolutely trounced. So I got into the tournament scene after that, worked my way through 40K, etc., etc. But I've always sort of had this desire to just do quite well again, because I did very well in 40K when I was still in South Africa. And then last year, I just got fed up with coming mid-tier in tournaments. So beginning of last year, I said, I'm going to focus on bolt action. So last year, I just focused on bolt action. I played a few other games, but my tournament play was bolt action. And I just got to learn how to play missions, etc., etc. And then doing well in CanCon was sort of like the pinnacle. And then the guys were chatting about WTC, and I thought, you know what? I am getting a little bit older. I probably am not going to be up to do this for too long in the future. I don't know. So if I'm going to go, now's probably the opportune time. I could probably go again next year or that, but I actually felt my time was about right for now. So put that all into the mix. When the folks said, would you like to go? I said, sounds good. Let's do it. And as I say, the CanCon motivated me to say, hold on, I could probably do this, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, for those who don't know, Richard placed second at CanCon. Played absolutely magnificently. Made a mess of a fair few people on his way through, and took a loss to Aaron Russell. Join the club, Richard. So yeah, Richard's top of his game. So it's great that we've got you coming with us.
Yeah, that's the problem. No pressure.
Feel better about losing my games against you, mate.
Well, this was actually supposed to be my trip away. My wife went to Bali last year for a week without the kids, and she said, "Oh, you should have a trip on your own." It was just before you put the announcement out, Jackson. So I went, "Oh, can I go to this?" And she went, "Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, no, you do that. You go on yourself." And then my mum been sick all year, and she sadly passed. And then Ali went, "Oh, I kind of want to see my dad. I think we should make it a family trip." And I was like, "Okay, but this doesn't count as my trip." And she was like, "Yeah, you go away for the week." I went there. I know. If I get on an airplane with children, this is not my trip. So apparently, I still have another trip to go. But I don't
so you
think
can return next year.
The fact we're here, sure, it'll happen. It'll turn into something else. But the fact I get to come here is great. And luckily, being a teacher, and this is sort of falling in the school holidays, so we took a week either side, leave without pay to come here, so we can make it a month, because 2 weeks with kids was just not a good idea. So. That's how I've ended up here. But I'm turning 50 this year, so I'm an old man, and this is I like the competitive side of this gaming thing. I like painting that, but it gets my competitive juices flowing, and pushing myself against people who are probably clearly going to be better than me is good. I enjoy that struggle to try and outthink people who have a lot more people to play against than I do, have a lot more groups to talk with than we do. I think that's going to be good. And just adding on to the whole Australia's different vibe, I think. Yeah, because we're so spread out, we don't have that. Everyone sort of chats, and you listening to you guys talk has been really amazing. Just watching the messages fly back and forwards, and how everyone looks at the game differently, but then still sticks to their guns. All right, I can see what you're saying. I'm going to take that into my thinking, but I still am going to adjust a little bit, but not wholly and solely. Okay, let's all play the same thing. I think has been really good to see with both teams.
Just
Well, guys,
two things for the.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, Bob.
I've got to go. I'm holding up family lunch. So thanks heaps for having me. And I'll let you know how I go.
Yeah,
hopefully I don't.
We'll catch up after the event.
I'll see you in a couple of days, boys.
Excellent. See you
Thanks,
in a couple
Bob.
of days,
See
mate.
you in England.
Perfect.
All right.
Good luck, mate.
All right, catches.
See ya.
See ya.
Just wanted to say what Bob was saying, turning 50. I'm actually turning 64 this year, so I've got a few extra years on him. But I think coming back to the point you said about friends and the enjoyment and learning, some of my change in strategy, I have to give full credit to young Jackson, playing a V2 game, I think it was, in sectors. And he showed me, and that was sort of the penny that dropped for me, that you must think of each mission in its own way. I sort of had a way of playing my game with my army and then trying to win the mission, whereas now you must actually play the mission and shift how you play your army for the mission and choose your army to some extent. So I must give you full credit for that, Jackson. You helped me shift my mindset there.
I actually didn't know what a watershed moment that game was for you. I know we're at a local good games, and it was one of the beginner tournaments, I thought. Thinking it was one of those things where we were playing it. We paired into each other. I was kind of like, well, this is a beginner event. When neither of us are beginners, what do you want out of this? So we just went, let's talk our way through it. And it was one of those things where we just had a whole stack of conversations playing sectors about how to play this mission, why you play this mission this way. And I think the key moment is we got partway through the game and I said to Richard, if you do that, you'll lose. And Richard turned to me and he went, what? I said, if you do that, that's game. And he was making a perfectly sound move to attack, but it was just the wrong thing it was a great move tactically, but for the strategy of the mission, it just wasn't the right thing. And part of that, and Richard's actually done the same back to me a number of times since V3's dropped, is the thing I think we're really bringing to WTC as a team, and as a nation overall, is that we've had a really strong focus on, cool, take what you want. How are you going to play the mission? Not how are you going to play your list, not this list is good.
Yeah.
How do you play the mission with this army? So Bob referred to his comments. Bob and I have been chatting a bit on the side. He referred to some conversations we'd had where I grilled him. I went through his list line by line and said, I don't care how your list works as a whole together. In this mission, what is this unit doing in this mission? What's its job in the mission? Richard's taken me to the cleaners a number of times, prepping with units like my scouts. I'm running Soviets. And he said, no. You may say that one large unit of scouts is the optimal quantity of scouts for a list, but for the missions, for the strategies, that's not right. And I had to really go back and think and go, okay, no, Richard's 100% right. Because for the mission, that's really the thing that we've got to emphasize. And I look at a lot of the lists going, and I go, yeah, this is a cool list. I just don't see how some of the lists that are really going heavy on armor, but are perhaps not. You don't need big squads of infantry. V3 really is a much more of a mechanized game than V2 ever was. You don't need big squads of infantry, but you need them to do specific jobs, and they need to be decent enough quality to do those jobs.
They've got to have
a role. Yeah. And I think that's really telling when you start looking at some of this going, I don't know that some of this stuff has jobs. And again, we may get to the event and it's going to be rubber hits the road, and it actually turns out that we've completely misunderstood the nature of the game, how their lists are working. That's actually not actually just probable, that's a certainty. We're going to get there and that's just going to be what it's going to be. The only player out of the 8 of us who have any experience in Europe is Aaron Russell, that A-team captain. And as Bob said, really, as players, our job is to say to Aaron, what do you want us to do? And just try to deliver on that, whether that be lose gracefully, scoring as many points on your way down, hold someone to a draw, or play super aggressive and get that win. But again, you're playing the objectives, not your list.
I just have to put up my 3 secret weapons that we'll see if they played for me or not. We'll have this conversation when we get back. But one word, Gewerksjagers. The idea of the Gewerksjagers with Fieldcraft, their job is to get to where I need them when I need them. Let's see if they play through the way I'm hoping. You know, chances are, as Jackson says, we start, we get played, we get out deployed or whatever, and they get blown off the table. Maybe not. Hopefully they actually do their job. So we'll see how we go. Because I've not seen Gewerksjagers in any of the other lists in any depth of strategy. I have seen a list with Gewerksjagers. I have seen a list with Spartruppen, but they've upgraded them as stubborn Fallschirmjäger. They've not upgraded them as Gewerksjagers with Fieldcraft. So I'm not seeing anyone who's picking up on the option to actually have these little nuisance squads that can forward deploy or infiltrate and suddenly be 12 inches where they weren't earlier because they've just run through terrain. So we'll see. I've actually also learned a new trick last night. I actually put one of the Spartruppen in one of the small 250 Hanemugs with the artillery officer. So suddenly you've got a little 5-man vehicle running around, and then the Spartruppen out of that thing like a bat out of hell through the trees. And guess what? They landed up on the enemy base. Bang. Game 1.
I like that.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think actually and both, Richard and I have both gone heavy on the infiltrators. One of the things is none of us have actually spoken specifically about what our lists are in this episode, and that might be something to go through line by line in the second episode that you guys were talking about doing. But one of the things is that infiltration is nuts. Incredible tool, but you need to leverage it correctly. And I'm seeing lots of lists with 3 squads or 2 squads of 5 or 6 scouts. And you look in the context of the list and you go, I don't think, these are nuisance squads. Great, okay. But the value in a scout unit is in its capacity to get somewhere and not die. And I'm looking at some of these lists going, I don't think you're leveraging that. In a 5-man scout squad is a substantially different beast than a 7-man scout squad. And it's again, it comes back to what you're talking about, Richard, with tools for specific jobs. And I just look at some of these units and go, are they? So I guess we're going to be able to report back on that and say, oh, actually, we were 100% wrong. They were right. But that's all just going to come out in the wash.
I don't think your mindset is wrong. It's going to have to be adjusted after seeing how the rest of the world plays. But without having exposure to what those things are, it's much better than particularly going down this meta list route where you've had this mindset that this type of list is the premium for all tables and whatever else. You've really gone down line by line. Richard mentioned it earlier that he doesn't have any wasteful units. He's not putting in an ordered icy unit. Everything has a function. So it's the best you can do with the unknown information of what's going to happen.
Absolutely. And that was something Aaron was really big on. It's no, just don't build to, and we've all really, Aaron's kind of been our sensei, for want of a better description, in this process for both teams. Because we're actually not working as separate teams. We're actually working as a group of 8 who will be playing as 2 teams, but we're all working together and supporting each other. And that's really, Aaron has given us that guidance of, no, don't start tooling to, oh, I need more dice, or oh, I need this, or oh, I need that. Build what you need, and then from there, tinker with it, test it, tinker with it, test it, and then from there go, okay, where am I wasting? And once you've nailed that down, then take it from there. I mean, I think we must be the only country as a whole to not have a finish list. Now, finish are the hotness in Europe. That's the big thing, is the finish list with hundreds of points worth of unreliable discount on different vehicles. Is something I would like to see fixed one day. There's, if you look at a lot of the Italian lists I mentioned, those are all keyed around units that people are saying are good. The German list, I was shocked with how few of some of the really interesting and creative tools in the German army book are actually seeing use. As Richard said, there are some Spartruppen there, and there are some Gebirgsjägers, but the lists don't look like they're leveraging it.
Yeah. It's sorry.
Yeah, it's just it's one of those things, like we just don't understand it. So when we go in, we'll work it out and we'll see whether we understand it or not.
But actually, maybe a frame of reference as well was, I was a little bit intimidated by CanCon because it's the big East Coast thing, and we can say this now because we're all West Coast over here. And and Jackson played last year and came back and shared where his experience was. So I was a little bit. We're going to go over to the East Coast where there's a lot more players, a lot bigger community, and it's going to be quite a big event. And I'll be honest with you, my first game really came down to I needed turn 7. It was against a fellow German player. And my Hetzer only came on from reserve on turn 6. So I was playing with 80% of my points in that game.
That Hetzer.
That Hetzer. You'll notice it's not in my list anymore. I then
not
found
because it's bad, just because it never shows up. It's not bad, it never shows up.
My next 3 games, my other 3 games, I did not feel I was up against very high competition. It was good competition. I'm not knocking it at all, but I expected another level. Other than obviously my game against Aaron. Now Aaron is another level, and I even felt better there. If I hadn't been so bloody intimidated and I'd actually been a little bit more aggressive, I actually think I could have taken Aaron. But it was because I had a certain strategy with that mission, and it was the wrong strategy for that mission against Aaron. It actually wasn't the wrong strategy for the mission, but against that army list, I had the wrong strategy. So I hadn't put the combination. So I came away thinking, okay, so we're actually at a pretty good standard here. Certainly West Coast to East Coast. I didn't feel like, and look at you, Jackson. I mean, you were all the way up until you lost your last game to Aaron as well. And that otherwise you would have won the tournament. So Jackson was right there to win if you'd beaten Aaron. So, we were right up there from the West Coast. And even Dave Davidson, who played with us, had one game that really hurt him, but he came 8th. So you've got the 3 guys who.
Even the other couple of guys who went, Colm and Alex.
Yes.
They're not hugely super. Like, they play a fair bit of bolt action, but they're not super. They haven't been around for 10 plus years like some of us. And both of them managed to make the top half of the field.
There you go. So that makes me feel a little bit like, okay, that's cool. It's comparing across Australia. Obviously, we're going to hit the world now, and they are playing a lot more depth. They've got a lot more insight. They talk to each other, but maybe they are conforming around a meta, and maybe they're getting a little bit tunnel visioned. Maybe we're coming. I mean, Bo apparently reached out to Aaron and said to him, his comment on our Australian list was interesting. So I haven't got any more depth than that, but that's what we heard.
The telling thing about our list as opposed to theirs is we have selective armor. They have lots of armor.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that, and because all of this is good things, right? So like you're going over with the mindset that we know that we're probably going to run into something which goes, hey, we thought that actually does A, turns out it does Z, completely opposite end of the spectrum. We weren't ready for that. But you may be the Z, right?
Yeah.
Or to their A, which is and I feasibly expect that everyone will learn from everyone. That's how these things work. But going in there, and I'm glad that Aaron has taken the approach of focus in on what the missions require. That's absolutely a big tick that I would agree with. Not that I'm better than Aaron in any way, shape, or form, but I think that makes sense. Focus on the mission, focus on the testing and the tweaking. That's a tested and tried way to make sure you understand what your lists do. And then you just got to run it, and you just got to give it the shot, and you just got to go, I know everything I can possibly know. Now it's about running the gauntlet the first time, getting to know some cool new people on the other side of the world from different experiences, how they play the game. Probably that other big component that we've talked about, which is, we think certain parts and aspects of this game are absolutely game changing from our view, from our meta, from our experiences. Yep. It may be that, the small 5-man scout squads, as an example, with infiltrators, their purpose wasn't specifically board control and holding clamping objectives, but they use that as an early wave push or some other, mysterious piece that you don't know, right? And then you go, maybe it is uncomfortable to receive 35 submachine guns and point blank on turn 3. But that's part of the learning, and I think you're all going over with the right sort of mentality. The only thing I'll charge you with, is just bring it back and tell us, so we can all get better.
100%.
No, that's good. That's good.
So,
yes.
I mean, you guys are going to be the wild card there from both perspectives. Like, the European teams are going to be used to fighting European opponents that all seem to have maybe similar lists and maybe a mindset of how to play those lists. They're going to come across you every single game. They're not going to know how you play. And it's sure you can say that for any nation, but you're going to be the wild card. And it's going to be sure, you're feeling it as well. But they don't necessarily feel that with every other opponent there. They know what to expect.
They're going to be really confused when we're hanging off the ceiling. Playing upside down.
Yep. Oh, man. But yes, I do want to see... obviously, I really want to hear about this and how it ends up infiltrating our scene. Three in WA... having the knowledge post this of how the rest of the world plays is really going to be interesting.
And also just even some of the other observations, I know when Jackson came back from CanCon the first time, there were some other what I would call gaming mannerisms and things where it was they actually play this a lot tighter than what we do. We probably need to sharpen ourselves up and get really clear on those distinctions. I was because I'm so used to playing in that way, and I play with the people where we've sort of crafted this ourselves, that wasn't something that I considered needed to be tightening up. But on reflection, that probably does make sense for us to tighten that up. It's those sorts of things as well that I believe we actually have a fairly decent and a high standard of play in WA, because the people's attitude behind it is quite good. We have I feel very privileged for our WA community. I feel we've got a lot of really, really good people, and even people on the fringes that sort of, when they can, step in and out. And we're all good blokes, ladies, girls, everything. It's wonderful. But because we've got such a known rapport with one another, one of the unintended consequences of that is we sometimes play by intent naturally without talking about it, right? Yeah. So we go, I'm just going to move these guys here, they're towing cover, or they're just outside, and we don't always verbalize exactly what's happening, for example. And so when you're getting shot back, you innately both know where that unit roughly is. It's that's different when you're going to play, somewhere else. It's no, I have to make sure that that I have only moved them up to their 6 inches or 12 inches or whatever it is respectively, that they are in or not in, that there are 5 in, 5 out, or that there are 6 in and 4 out. Those things, start to make a bit more of a difference. That determines, obviously, those cover saves or those bonuses and other impacts to the game. And that's something which, naturally we've glossed over for a long time. But not everyone, but certainly I have. Because I'm used to just playing the game and streamlined working with, and I'm close enough is good enough. Yeah, let's get on and have fun. And it is those sorts of things to come back and learn about. So, how do they look at their lanes of fire in their deployment? Like how do they interpret a table layout? Is it the same way that we would interpret it? Because it's probably not. It's probably they might rate things as more exposed or at different ranges, or they would break up their maneuvering into different turn phases or sequences. So we typically have in our scenes, depending on the type of list that you build, you will have very clear turn 1, turn 2 maneuvering and opening, and then you've got turn 3 as sort of setting down for your launch. Turn 4, you're very much engaged in having combat, and you're trying to get to the point as quickly as possible in turn 5 where you're wrapping things up. Now that feels sensible in how we've approached the game forever and a day, but they could be going, turn 1 is all hell, like just everything just pushes forward to try and gain the time, or they could go the opposite where they'd be very piecemeal on that engagement, depending on the mission. So that'll be quite interesting.
Yeah, classic example of that is that Australia won's first matches into England won. As Richard mentioned, there's a lot of relatively lower dice lists with big armored transports and bigger tanks. I think their tanks on average are a little bit heavier than most of the rest of the field. And you look at that and go, cool, okay, so none of the lists, there's an American list and a British list in there, there's no observers. Okay, cool. So they're obvious picks that would normally go straight into a list for each of those and maybe come out if you have a specific reason. You look at it, you go, okay, they've got bigger tanks. Okay, that's also its own pick. I mean, there's 3 Lees across 5 lists. And only 2 of those countries can take Lees. And then you go, okay, cool. So that also makes sense. You look at it, you go, okay, so they're going to play the same game as us. Well, no, because there's also a company commander in every one of those lists.
Yep.
And you go, okay, cool. Company commander, no area of effect radius, long range weapons, and lots of heavier or comparatively heavier armor. Okay. The only interpretation Wiggle can have off that straight away is that's a full send list.
Yep.
That's everyone dumps everything into transports and just drops a brick on the brake on the accelerator and straight at you. But that's how we'd interpret those lists after some fairly lengthy conversations about it. That's how we think they're going to play demolition. We might get there and they just decide to castle up around their demolition objectives and go, cool, we're playing for draws, have fun.
Yeah,
and that's also a perfectly valid tactic.
Correct.
Personally, I prefer that rather than getting multiple leads pointed at me round 1 and sent straight at me, depending on tables. But yeah, that's a classic example of something where we can interpret it one way. There's at least one other potential play pattern we've identified. Obviously, it's our round 1 opponents. We've massively overthought that round matchup because we have the capacity to plan for that, so it's worth talking about. But yeah, it's a classic literal example of just what you were saying.
Yeah. I think it'll be quite interesting to see it all come through. But just double checking my notes here. I think that's everything I had. Jacob, did you have any other questions, or guys, if you had other things you want to comment on?
Well, I'm keen to have a follow up when we get back. I think we've said a lot, so it's probably worth chatting about when we're done. But just from my side, but huge thanks to you guys, both of you, for HMG to listen to us and invite us. So thank you.
Thanks for coming across, guys. We're really excited to hear what's going to happen post event. And yeah, if you can still kind of piece together in what your mindset was pre and post, I mean, it's going to be severely different. And then just seeing how that's going to flow onto your future games and how you are as players moving forward, it's exciting. Because you guys are 2 of the top players for WA. I said it earlier, you guys have been playing 4D chess when I was getting into V3. And yeah, look, I learned the most playing both of you. Jono's pretty good too. I think it's gonna be exciting because there's just gonna be so much more that we're gonna learn out of this collectively as a community. So thanks for representing WA. It's going to be great.
Should be good,
Bob too.
hopefully.
Oh, pleasure, and thank you all.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank
All
you for
right.
the show.
We'll wrap it
Cheers
up
then.
there, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for joining us at HMG.